Herewith we present an Almanac, containing a variety of new, useful, and entertaining matter, pleasing to men of all humors. Today, our guide is Charles Schwartz, photographer, illustrator, and biologist for the Missouri Conservation Commission.
Today I'm going to talk about a great American institution, private ownership. This fence I'm leaning on is a symbol of ownership. The man that built this fence owns this land. This man bought this land and he paid taxes for it. He built a house on it and he farms it. And it's his to do practically anything he wishes with. As a matter of fact, this man will even defend this land if someone tries to take it from him. Now, that's quite true. And perhaps without this landowner's knowledge, there are others who claim ownership of this land. Others who live on it and who parcel out the land to suit themselves and who defend it. Let's take a look at this land as our fence builder sees it. Over on this hillside, he has his wheat crop. And on the other side of the farm, a red clover patch, which he'll use for hay and as a means of fertilizing his field. A small stream runs through the bottom of his farm. And next to the stream, his cattle feed in the pasture. Besides these cattle, the farmer utilizes the grain and practically everything else growing on his 160 acres to support himself and his family. Now, I'd like to introduce you to some of the other owners of this land. This red-tailed hawk owns every dead snag that affords him a good view of this 160 acres of lands. And from this dead snag, he regards every wild creature that he sees as his own. Of course, every creature that he is capable of catching. His 8-power vision pick up even the tiniest of animals. And animals like this gopher belong to the red-tailed hawk. But the gopher, in his way of thinking, owns every bit of land that he tunnels into and chases other gophers away. At night, the red-tailed hawk's ownership is taken over by the great horned owl, who utilizes the same dead snags that the red-tail considered his. Now this great horned owl forages over the same territory the red-tailed hawk foraged over in the daytime. And his night-seeing eyes pick out every movement and every creature because he regards those things as his. He even sees the little deer mouse and considers this deer mouse as a potential source of food. But the deer mouse, in its way of thinking, thinks of every seed and every acorn and every hollow log in just perhaps a quarter acre of land as his own personal property. The flicker has a peculiar form of ownership. When a tree becomes sick, it is usually riddled with wood-burrowing beetles. Now this flicker forages in this tree and tries to get all of these beetles for himself. He drives other animals away. And several generations later, that is flicker generations later, when this tree dies and becomes just a gaunt, sun-bleached skeleton against the sky, other animals take over this same tree. A flicker may even come back and build its own home in this tree. And when the flicker hollows out a place in the tree, it lays its eggs there and raises its young. That's flicker property. When the flicker dies or migrates, another animal may take over. This little nocturnal creature, a flying squirrel, which is so small that it can easily fit into a teacup, takes over the flicker's home. The flying squirrel may utilize only a couple of acres of land surrounding this dead stub. But in those 2 acres or so, every insect and every acorn and even hickory nut that it can find will be considered as its own private property. The hummingbird owns every aquilegia or every wild columbine because here he gets his food in the form of nectar. And the robin has a form of ownership that is different. Robins must use mud to plaster and line their nests. And this robin has found a prime mud puddle, and he is gathering mud and dead grass with which to build his nest. Now, this robin considers this mud puddle as his own bit of property. And when he leaves, another robin may come back or come into the same place and take over a temporary form of ownership because this robin recognizes the value of this mud as a very fine plastering material. Of course, if the original robin comes back, there's apt to be a very brief fight. There, you see, the original robin came back and claimed his mud puddle. This is mine. Stay away, other robins. Even ants have their ownership in their little roadways on the forest floor. The red-winged blackbird, Mayo, sets up a territory, a form of ownership in the marsh, over in the bottomland. His mate uses this territory. This territory is made principally for these young, which the pair have reared or are rearing. When the female forages out over the marsh, she may feed practically any place. But when she comes back to her nesting territory, the male proclaims ownership, and the female then comes in and feeds her young unmolested. The buckeye butterfly has a peculiar form of ownership. He may take over just one milkweed blossom, and he flicks his wings and warns other buckeye butterflies to stay away. This is his source of nectar and his resting place on this sunny afternoon. A milkweed beetle also has a form of ownership on one milkweed leaf, and the monarch butterfly feeds on another blossom and then lays its eggs, and when these eggs hatch and form the monarch larva, the larvae, or caterpillars, forage on the milkweed leaf and consider it as their own personal property. The tree toad hides away the daylight hours on the milkweed. This is his little bit of real estate, just a couple of inches. Over at another part of the farm, the bobwhite quail have a different setup. These birds have an expanding ownership. At one season of the year, a male may set up a whistling territory, and then if another male challenges him, the first whistling bird may get down from his perch and go over and see just how close is this neighbor. Perhaps he's getting on my property. That's the way the bobwhite thinks, I think. Of course, there's usually another reason for this. A female bobwhite may be nearby. But when the first male encounters the second one, a fight usually occurs, and the one that is superior is going to win. Now that male will come back, and if for whatever reason a female bobwhite finds attractive, a pair of quail is formed. These quail set up a nesting territory. The female here has made her nest under a multiflora rose fence. She may just have a few yards on either side of this nest as territory, which is defended. But when the family hatches and the little chicks must be raised, then the feeding areas enlarge greatly, and these feeding areas expand as the needs of the family develop. Other families may have their requirements or their problems too, and sometimes the feeding grounds of two different families overlap. But nevertheless, they expand and enlarge as the family wants occur. And with the seasonal changes, the wants even expand still further. In autumn, those families have merged together to form one big covey, and now this covey is ranging over about 40 acres of this farm. And here they find the seeds and the insects and other things that make life so attractive to quail. But when winter sets in and seeds become scarce and ice and snow form, then the quail must range over much of this 160 acres of farm. And in this way, their wants expand and contract with the seasons and with their daily needs. Now this brings us back to the original question. Just who does own the land? That isn't an easy question to answer, and I'm not sure that I can. Of course, we own it in a very legal sense. That's true. And at the same time, these wild animals own it in a wild sense. We benefit from the land. And so do these wild creatures. They benefit the same as we do. They have to have food to live from. They have to have homes, places where they can make their nests and where they can rear their young. And they also must have places where they can idle and loaf and play. I'm not sure that I know the full answer to this question. I know this, that the more we learn about this matter of wildlife and the land, the more complex the problem becomes. But we do know that when we treat our land wisely, when we don't abuse it, these wild creatures live on our land and stay there and seem to like it and want to own it. But when we abuse this land and don't care for it, most of these wild creatures leave us. They don't want any part of this real estate. They have no interest in it. And there's another point of view, and that's this, that these animals, in the course of their generations of living here, have contributed much to this land. The little chipmunks that live and die have contributed much to the organic waste and the fertility of the soil. All of these animals have done so. The animals like the worms that live in the soil contribute to the land. The squirrels, which hide nuts in the fall and who can't find these hidden foods in the spring, contribute to our forests because our forests grow as a result of these lost foods. And so these animals have been largely responsible for making this land so attractive and so desirable for us to want to own it in the first place. And as I think about this as a naturalist, I believe that the best way to look at this whole picture is to develop a tolerance, a point of view or an attitude whereby we try to understand the role these animals play on this land, these other owners. And if by learning and understanding our land, it will be a better place for both the wild creatures and for us to own.